Dr. Paul Saba, it's such an honor to have you here today. Dr. Saba is going to present on the subject based on the title of his book, Made to Live, which presents euthanasia, assisted suicide, and abortion from a Christian and medical ethical perspective. The purpose of the book is to remind everyone of how precious life is and to reject this new mythology we have that life is only a disposable commodity. Dr. Paul Saba, MD, is a physician who has studied, trained, and worked in Canada and the United States and internationally in war-torn Lebanon and Somalia and Bangladesh, Honduras, the Ivory Coast, and Haiti. And since 1998, he has actively worked to improve Quebec and Canada's publicly funded healthcare through the Coalition of Physicians for Social Justice, which he co-founded and presides over. He successfully fought for free medication for the disadvantaged, nutritional support for the elderly, and physical fitness for children. And he's made a number of presentations opposing assisted suicide and euthanasia before state legislatures in New Hampshire, Connecticut, and New York, and before international forums in Rome, Reykjavik, Iceland, Santiago, Chile, and Tbilisi, Georgia. And presently he is contesting euthanasia and assisted suicide laws in Canada's courts. And the reason we're featuring Canada is I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn about Canada, principally about what direction not to go with this whole issue. So just before Paul speaks to us, we're going to show a brief video of introduction, and then Paul will take over after that.
So Jessica is feeding right now. And how many days is she? How old is Jessica today?
The title really came out of the inspiration of my daughter. And the story of my daughter started back in 2009. Before she was born, at 20 weeks on the ultrasound, the medical team took us aside and said, you know, we're sorry to say this, but your future baby has a severe problem, a severe congenital malformation. And we said, well, what do you mean by that? They said, well, she doesn't have a viable heart and she probably has Down syndrome. And we really questioned whether she's going to have any quality of life and whether she could even survive. And so they said to us that you should consider your medical options. And I said, medical options? What do you mean? Well, if you're going to terminate the pregnancy, you should do it now. We did another ultrasound, 24 weeks, 4 weeks later, and it was the same conclusion. And we said, absolutely not. We're not going to terminate this pregnancy. As my wife says, I've done everything to get the pregnancy as far as I have, and you're going to do everything for my baby.
We'll have to be taking her home.
The greatest abandonment is giving up on people, and the worst way of abandoning is killing them, either through assisted suicide or euthanasia, or through abortion. So that's what the story is how every human life is valuable, whether you're preborn, after birth, or even at the end of a long life. But never give up. Always have hope. You are valuable because you are made to live.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, everyone in over 100 countries. I thank you so much for this opportunity. I just want to share the story with you because it's so important. Every life is valuable. And why is every life is valuable? We cannot get away from our Judeo-Christian values. And those come right from the Bible, where it states that God created us in his own image, in the image of God. He made us male and female, he created them. So because we're in the image of God, we are valuable for that reason. The book story of and the video trailer that you just saw really started when my daughter Jessica was 7 years old. I asked her, honey, could you draw us a picture of our family? And she did. As I told you, she at 20 and 24 weeks, they had advised us to abort her. They said she wouldn't have any quality of life, that she had a severe cardiac malformation. And she did have the cardiac malformation. They also said she'd be Downs, which she wasn't. But people who have Downs babies really have wonderful children and wonderful lives. So at 7, I said, draw a picture. And she, as you can see, she, dad, mom, sis, bro, me, Jessica, made to live. And it was really, I think that was God inspiring that she wrote that. And not only is Jessica made to live, but we're all made to live. Here's a recent picture. There's on the left side, my son John Anthony, my wife Marissa. Jessica is in the middle. Eliana is right next to me. And so we ask, I'm going to be focusing on euthanasia, but I think we need to look at life as a continuum. We start from the preborn. While a child is in their mother's womb, and in the biblical Bible, it talks about we're in our mother's womb and we're known to God, and that we have a progression from the time that we're delivered to the time that we live our life. And life has been given to us by our Creator, who values each person as a dignified human being created in His image. And as a medical professional, my commitment is to value each person and to care for each of them, as in the parable of the Good Samaritan. And why do we talk about the Good Samaritan? I want to focus on that for a minute. Is that the story in the Gospel of Luke talks about how a man was beaten up by brigands, left to die on the side of the road. And many people passed him by, notable people, people with wealth, people with means, people of stature. But the Samaritan stopped, bound up his wounds with olive oil, with wine, which was the natural treatments back then, put him on his donkey and carried him to the inn. And at the end, he told the innkeeper, he says, do everything for him. And when I come back, I'm giving you some money now, paid for his care. And when I come back, whatever more needs to be done, I will do. So here's the example where everything is done for somebody who is who was left half dead. In our culture, in Canada's culture, he would be considered a candidate for euthanasia assisted suicide. But and even in the Roman times, the Stoics saw if anyone was sick or in any bad condition, that it was noble for them to end their lives. So as I was saying, we don't know what the outcome of the fellow who was taken care of at the end. Did he survive? Did he pass away? Was he left handicapped? We don't know the outcome, but that's not what matters. What matters is that he was cared for, and that's our responsibility. Next, I'm going to talk about the reasons for abortion. In a 2005 study, which was published by Guttmacher Institute. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to go to the. Yeah, that's fine. 2005 study. Reasons people have abortions, and this is an institute that's very pro-abortion. They're part of Planned Parenthood in the United States. The majority of women, 73%, made the decision because of financial concerns, and 38% because fear of loss of education, career opportunities. You see it's more than 100%, but they had many opportunities to give reasons why they decided not to keep their baby. 14% wanted, the partners wanted the abortion, and there was concern about health in about 13%, as was the case of our daughter Jessica, but we chose not to abort her. And so on the next slide, I want to talk to you about what happened in Canada in recently. And I was out in front of the hospital at a press conference. There was a 30-week-old unborn baby who was boarded at one of our major hospitals. And the reason that that child was aborted was for what they called social concerns, because the woman was homeless and she didn't want her child to be taken in by services, child protection services. So she decided to abort. So it was a fully formed baby. And that was acknowledged by the hospital eventually. I think we have, and I'm going to show in the next slide, the solutions for abortion. You know, in the United States, and I'm sure in the United Kingdom and countries around the world, they see a money savings for not bringing the baby to term. And in a US study, they showed that they could save money during the prenatal care and aftercare over a 2-year period. And that's just a short-term, what they call savings. They don't look at the value of these children in terms of one day they could be teachers, they could be doctors, they could be nurses, they could be workers in the work field. That's never looked at. And in the United States, where there was the recent decision by the Supreme Court to not direct abortion and make it legal from a federal perspective, but to turn it back to the states, companies have offered to pay for birth parental leave. The companies have offered to pay for transport to the mothers to states where abortion is allowed, but they never talk about paying for parental leave, childcare expenses, and giving women decent salaries so that they can afford to keep their babies. And that's really what we need to do. We need to look at every life as being valuable from the preborn until during the course of life after delivery. And the next slide, I talk about what I see as the responsibilities of the doctors. The doctor must influence people's lives by caring, healing, and improving life. They need to give hope when people are in despair. They need to help them find a solution to life's problems. They need to accompany them, and they need to earn the patient's trust over the course of a person's life. And in the next slide, I talk about the responsibilities of doctors even more. And the best way to do this is to accompany a person to ensure them that they're never abandoned. And then when, despite whatever we do and we do the best care we can, there may come a day when the person is faced with a prognosis that tells them that their lives will eventually come to an end. Of course, there's never any guarantee. Things do change, but as physicians, we try to give the best information we can. And we need to alleviate them during that time, whether it's physical distress, emotional, mental, and financial and spiritual. And it's never the role of a physician to end a life. We're there to treat. We try to cure when we can, but never intentionally, and never to abandon the person right to the end of life. I'm going to give a little history in the next slide of what happened in Canada. In the 2016, there was a bill. It was called Bill C-14, and in 2016, after the euthanasia was passed in Canada, there was a bill to look at extending it to children and other groups, including mental disorders. And I want to talk a little bit about what happened just before euthanasia became legalized in Canada. There was the Canadian Medical Association, and they went neutral, even though their own surveys show that the majority of physicians were opposed. they said, well, since we have people who are for assisted suicide and euthanasia, we're going to go neutral. And when it went to the courts stated that the Canadian Medical Association, which is a voluntary association, had gone neutral, and therefore they were not opposed. And that's one of the strategies that the pro-euthanasia assisted suicide groups use. They try to get the medical societies, the associations, to go neutral. So it's important that you as an organization fight against that, because they'll use the neutrality argument as a reason to promote assisted suicide and euthanasia in whatever country you're living. And then right after the bill was passed, the Parliament mandated a study group to look about extending it to other groups, including children and those with mental disorders, because they said it would be discriminatory if we don't allow euthanasia to children and we don't allow euthanasia to people with mental disorders, we would be discriminating against them. And then in March of 2021, the law was passed to extend it to those without life-ending conditions, including those with disabilities. And as of March 17th, that's only a few months away, euthanasia, assisted suicide will be allowed to those with mental illnesses, with only a 3-month waiting period. So that here in the province of Quebec, where I practice, there's about a 5-month waiting time from the time I refer to a person to get treatment to a psychiatrist, to the treatment. So if a person is on the 3-month waiting period to be euthanized, they will have long gone before they ever see a psychiatrist. In the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the medical ethics that surround us as physicians. As a physician, I am here in Canada. I'm not obligated to euthanize, but I'm obligated to refer. And referral, as you know, is like sending someone to a person that we consider trustworthy and that we have confidence in. So it's like writing a prescription and knowing that the person will be killed. The Nuremberg principles, which came out of the Second World War, showed that referring is equivalent to participating in euthanasia and makes one guilty as one who commits euthanasia. And some people falsely believe that since they would never agree to euthanasia or assisted suicide, it will not affect them or their families. So obviously, that's not true, because there will be somebody in somebody's family, because with euthanasia assisted suicide, well, you're no longer involved. The person makes that autonomous decision on their own. And we can talk about whether it's really a decision that's made without pressure or coercion, because when a person feels that they're a burden, or if they're feeling in distress, can they really make a clear, reasoned decision that's not affected by their circumstances? And it's clear that that's not the case. And even though the law states a person cannot be coerced, people can feel coerced from social situations. As you know, when a person is faced with a medical problem or health or mental problem, their finances often reduced because they can't work. And there's also social pressures because they don't want to feel like they're a burden. And in most cases, when you look at why people decide on getting euthanized, it's not because of physical pain. It's because the majority of the reasons are because they feel that they are a burden, they feel isolated, they feel that they've lost some independence, and that has nothing to do with physical pain. The next slide I want to look at is the going back to the ethics issue, which I think is very important, because the Hippocratic oath, which was taken for many years by doctors and is still in some medical schools an oath that people take. It started around 2,500 years ago at the time of Hippocrates, and I know that most of you are aware of that, but during that time, there were physicians who would administer poisons. They would also cause abortions to happen. And Hippocrates really led a movement of physicians who would not intentionally cause the death of a patient. If you took that oath, you would not intentionally cause the death of a patient. Since that time, medicine has had a mandate to heal, but not to hasten death. And then at many forums where I presented and I talked about the Judeo-Christian ethics, and the people at the hearings have said, well, Dr. Saba, that was then and we're modern. But the basis of modern medical ethics is based on Judeo-Christian ethics. Sir William Osler, who was the father of modern medical ethics and graduated from Yale University, where I graduated from in Montreal, and he founded Johns Hopkins University, based his ethics on the Good Samaritan model, which we spoke briefly about just before. And that really is the foundation of why medicine has advanced so well, and why people have benefited from modern medicine, because we care for it. We have a model of caring and not doing harm. But in the medical aid in dying, which is the term they use, the euphemism they use for euthanasia and assisted suicide, the doctor, the healer, becomes the doctor, the executioner. I'm going to go on the next slide a little bit about what happened during Roman times. Roman philosophers such as Seneca, who were known as Stoics, they encouraged suicide, and they said it was noble if you were elderly, poor, disabled, failing physical or mental health, or weary, and if you deemed life wasn't worthy, it was considered noble to end one's life. And so self-destruction was considered to be an obligation to friends, family, and society. And it, to them, it exhibited freedom and autonomy, very much like people who are promoting euthanasia and assisted suicide today. They said it preserved dignity. Well, my argument and our arguments have been that dignity comes by living and not by ending somebody's life. We're dignified because we're created in the image of God, and that alone is why we are dignified. And killing oneself, or a physician killing someone else, is not dignity. In the next slide, I have the World Medical Association position on assisted suicide, and that came out again, was reiterated in 2019, and it represents over 10 million doctors in 112 countries, their complete opposition to assisted suicide and euthanasia as a medical treatment, and it goes against the values of doctors. In the next slide, you'll see a picture of the Titanic. What does that have to do with the whole battle of euthanasia? It's because euthanasia or assisted suicide has been promoted by some bioethicists as for a utilitarian model of human life. In other words, if you're productive and useful to society, then you should live. Otherwise, you're better off dead. And this model comes with the idea that we have only limited resources as a society, and that it's like the lifeboats on the Titanic. Only the strongest who could fight and make it to the lifeboats would survive, and that's the way they view society. But in fact, the good Samaritan model would say we need to create enough lifeboats so that everybody can survive. And the next slide, I show the Canadian flag, and I ask, are children going to be next? Because we've already extended it to those with mental disorders. And just to let you know that as of March 17th, 2024, anyone who has a mental health disorder will be eligible. And as a family doctor, we are often the primary caregivers to those with mental disorders. And therefore, we're going to be faced with people who will be coming to us and saying, I want to be euthanized because I have, there's over 300 mental illnesses for which people can be diagnosed, 20 basic mental disorders. And it's interesting to note, and it's sad, but the greatest impact will be on those who are young adults, those who are poor, those with pre-existing mental health conditions, Native people and women and other marginalized groups. So right after that, we're looking at extending it to children, and that's been studied. And they're looking at it to, and the next slide, there was a Canadian Council of Academics. They want to ensure that children were not being ignored or excluded. And in the next slide, I explained, they tried to justify extending it to children by saying that there would be mature minors, and mature minors to them are those who are under 18 years old, and which would not require the prior approval from would not require the prior approval of the parents, that the child themselves could make that decision. So children in the next slide, as young as 11 or 12, could see their lives ended prematurely. I give the case of Nadine, and I talk about her in the next slide. She was diagnosed at 14 with an aggressive form of leukemia, underwent multiple chemotherapies and bone marrow, and almost died. But today she's alive and well. And some ethicists would say anyone who has to undergo those treatments would be better off if they could make a decision to end their life, because we don't know outcomes, but that doesn't matter, that the person is autonomous and makes their decision. And the next slide, I talk about the logic of child euthanasia. Children, despite them even though they may be said to be mature, we don't allow them to vote, to drive, to enter into civil contracts, to even get married. So their lives would be thrown away. People, and I'll be talking now about the inability to work safeguards. In the next slide, I want to show you the next slides of that safeguards don't work. And they're constantly being moved, they're constantly being changed. For example, in Canada, it was initially euthanasia, assisted suicide for those who were terminally ill, who only had, first they said a few days to live, then they said a few months, and then they said a year or more to live, but that there was a foreseeable end to their life. So there's constantly expanding, and this is what's happened to Canada. So now that somebody with just a disability can have their life ended, who has many years to live. There's a whole idea of promoting and selling death. In the next few slides, I'll be showing you some of the ways that those who are promoting euthanasia sell death. They use euphemisms, for example. They call it dying with dignity, compassionate choices, medical aid in dying. They don't use the term euthanasia or assisted suicide. They medicalize euthanasia. They co-opt the doctors, get them involved, so that people say, well, if the doctor kills the person, it's not killing, it's a treatment. They have studies which and surveys with skewed questions. They say, well, would you support it if somebody's with insufferable pain? They don't talk about providing palliative care, which can take care of that, the distress that people feel physically. They co-opt the victim. They call it a voluntary act to convince the person that they're better off dead and let them sign up. There's a whole issue of legalizing euthanasia. In the next slide, if you say if it's legal, it must be okay. The media glamorize it. There's movies, there's stories of telling people, showing the people surrounded by their family members, and celebrating death. There's lobbying by pro-assisted groups. There's pressures on legislatures to enact laws. There's apathy by the public. And I'm sure that's not us, because otherwise you wouldn't be watching this webinar. They falsify numbers. They start by saying there's only going to be a tiny handful. They use extreme language. They say that if you don't die through euthanasia, you'll have a horrible, agonizing death. They say, they claim that if a person doesn't die by euthanasia, that they may throw themselves off a bridge. They say that doctors know who is going to die in the immediate future, and we know that there's a 50% error of knowing whether a patient will die in the next 6 months. They talk about, we know the person definitely has a serious incurable illness, but we know that there's 20% error rates in 20% error rates for those with severe illnesses, including cancer. And in my book, I talk about that, a patient that was certain through multiple studies that he had lung cancer, and he's a 50-year-old engineer, but in the end, he did not have lung cancer, and he had Hodgkin's lymphoma, for which he was treated successfully. They attack the opponents. They say if you're against euthanasia, then you're for suffering, and they identify it as being progressive. And this is not progressive, as I showed you earlier. This dates back to the Roman times, and even back to times of Hippocrates, when people were being killed. I want to talk now about the slippery slope in Canada. At the beginning, when legislation, the ministers of health, government officials said it'd be only a handful of people. Since 2016, and I can update the slide, there's been over 50,000 euthanasia deaths in Canada. In the province where I live and where I have fought this law, they removed the end of life criteria. So it started off, you had to be seeing a foreseeable end, and that ended. And the Canadian court decision that prompted the Canadian law also was talking about a foreseeable end. So now people with who are handicapped can be euthanized, and starting in March, people with mental disorders, even without treatment, because in Canada's law, you don't have to. You can say, I don't want any type of treatment, even if it's treatable, and you have the right, because that's all considered the respecting the person's autonomy. People are being offered medical aid in dying and euthanasia, or I call it euthanasia, for even multiple chemical allergies. And people are being euthanized because of lack of adequate food, housing, and home care. So if there's some type of medical condition they can hook to, and soon it'll be mental disorders, they can end their lives. And most of the reasons that people are asking for it is not because of their medical conditions, but because of their social misery, and because we're not caring for people, so they're lining up for it. I'm going to just say a few words on palliative care, because for people who are truly at the end of life, palliative care offers the right care for those rather than euthanasia. And studies have shown that people who have palliative care are much happier than those who don't have it, and they have better quality of life, and often even live longer because they're more comfortable. The problem here in Canada, and I imagine in the rest of the world, is the majority of people don't have access to palliative care. So rather than promoting euthanasia-assisted suicide, we should be promoting palliative care. To conclude, we must value all lives, from the beginning of life to the natural end. We must support women who want to keep their children financially, psychologically, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Those who are church-based and have a church must work to make sure that the church supports these mothers and their children, and not condemn them. I always look at Jesus, the woman who was caught in the act of adultery, and after he said, "He's without sin, cast the first stone," they all moved away. Then he turned to the woman, he says, "Who condemns you?" And she said, "No one, Master." And he says, "Neither do I condemn you." He says, "Sin no more." If you look up the word for sin in that Hebrew term. It meant don't go down the same pathway. So God's always there, and we should be the same, use it as a model. We need to encourage people to go down the right path, and we need to help them to go down the right path. And those who are truly at the end of life or facing serious health issues, we need to provide them all the proper healthcare, social, psychological, financial services, and we need to ensure that people are treated correctly and with respect. And I recommend that we, as far as medical care, that the best care is palliative care for those truly at the end of life. Euthanasia assisted suicide must be excluded as a form of end-of-life care. States and countries who practice euthanasia assisted suicide must stop these practices and declare them as illegal. And finally, what can we do? Well, first of all, I always encourage everyone to pray and to act. Pray is very important, so God can give us wisdom, and we can pray for our leaders, pray for our politicians, pray for our friends and family, pray for our media. We also need to write and speak to these people. We need to speak about this in our church communities, organizations, to expose them to the dangers of euthanasia-assisted suicide. You can go to my website, madetolive.com, if you want to purchase the book. You can also friend me on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to reach out to me, my email will be made available to you. If you want this copy of the slides, they will be made available to you. And if you want to speak to me, I'll be glad to talk to you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thanks very much, Paul. We've been listening to Dr. Paul Saba talking about the very sobering events that are happening in Canada as a result of changing the law to allow euthanasia and assisted suicide there. We've now got a bit of time for question and answers. Dr. Paul, we often hear that it's possible to legislate in such a way that there'll be no collateral damage, if you like, that only those who absolutely certainly want it can have it. From your experience in Canada, what's the response to that?
Yeah, I sit actually on a committee. I was asked to sit on a committee to review hospital assisted suicide euthanasia, even though they know I'm very opposed to it. They thought it would be good to have somebody who was opposed. And as I stated earlier, the majority of people who have asked to have their lives ended, the great majority is for, I'd say 90%, for social reasons. They feel isolated. They feel that they're a burden. They don't have the same autonomy that they had before, and much of it is due to what when they call about suffering. It really is existential. It's psychological, and they just they're not getting the proper support. So we do have palliative care teams, but they can refuse it. They make their decision to end their life. And we could be doing lots more to help support them and make them feel that they're valuable. And there's many different therapies that aren't even available. It's not just pain medications that people need. There's music therapy. There's art therapy. There's pet therapy. There's many things that we can do more to help these people and visiting them and making them feel part of the community. And that's a lot. So that's what I call collateral damage.
Yeah. Well, and you've demonstrated very clearly that once you change the law to allow any euthanasia or assisted suicide at all, you inevitably get slippery slope or incremental extension. So you start with the terminally ill, then it's the chronically ill. You start with the physically ill, then it's the mentally ill. You start with adults, then it's children, and so on. It seems impossible to control it or to frame a law which won't lead to this kind of extension.
Yeah, they just keep moving the barriers. You know, it's like a goalpost in a you call it soccer or football. You just make it wider and wider so that you can let all the balls through eventually.
What's been the public reaction to, because we've been watching this almost slow motion car crash across the Atlantic that's happening in Canada with regard to this? Are these horror stories waking the public up to want to change the law, or has the public conscience changed as a result?
Well, I think that looking at the extension to mental health disorders, the majority, they did a recent Angus poll, and only about 29% support that. The vast majority of the population is opposed to mental disorders. We almost came close to going against the law, but we just lacked about 8 or 9 members of parliament, because the Liberal Party has insisted that everybody vote on as a block, so that they try to maintain their position, even if it's a bad law, and even if it's a wrong law. The government wants to save face, so Canadians are opposed, but we tend to, I wouldn't say we're as British as the British, but we tend to be sort of stiff upper lip and not admit that we've done something wrong. And I think the further we go down that road, it's going to be harder and harder to turn back. It's like what we've done with abortion. And I compare that. I'm told that they're different, but it's not different. It's a continuum of life. For us to admit that we've sacrificed all these babies and we could have kept them, it's like admitting that we made a mistake opening up euthanasia and losing all these lives, of thousands and thousands of people who could have still be alive today. And it's going to even be more so because we know with mental illness that these people are not dying from the mental illness. They're in distress because of lack of proper treatment, lack of proper social and financial supports.
Well, it's horrifying to think that people are being euthanized simply because it's a cheaper option than providing proper care or social support. But that's really happening at the moment in Canada.
And there are studies there are 2 studies, Canadian studies that looked at that and said that there was financial savings.
There's a couple of questions here about conscience issues, and you mentioned that you can't be coerced into carrying out euthanasia in Canada, but you are obligated to refer. So have there been doctors refusing to refer, and what's happened to them? Have there been court cases?
So far, no. They haven't made Canadian doctors. I mean, I know the Ontario filed a court action, but they lost, and so that they were told that they have to refer. Doctors who have not referred so far have not been taken to task. I refuse to refer. I will say that I will refer people to the palliative care team, because in the law, it states that you have to make them aware of all the possible treatment options. And the way I skirt around it is I say, listen, I'm a family doctor. I don't know what all the available options are for palliative care. So I send them back to the palliative care team to allow them to give them, and it gives them an opportunity to also meet with the palliative care team. So by law, I'm required to give them the information, what's available. Since I don't know, working in different institutions, what's all available, I send them back to the palliative care team. And the palliative care team can then refer, if they so choose, to a euthanasia doctor.
You mentioned it takes, under the new mental health clause, there's a waiting period of 3 months, but it takes on average 5 months to see a psychiatrist. Stephen Gleeson, who's a psychiatrist in the UK, is making the comment, people with mental illnesses are rarely able to weigh information in the balance due to illness in order to make a proper decision with full capacity in regard to euthanasia. Negative automatic thoughts and depression drive depression and hopeless thoughts, which of course we can treat and reverse. Comment on that.
Yeah, I recently did a public gathering downtown Montreal, and our human rights lawyer, famous Canadian human rights lawyer, Julius Gray, made it very clear that people with mental disorders often cannot make a properly informed consent, as the psychiatrist you just quoted said. They have negative thoughts, and so he would like us to challenge it, because the original decision in the Canadian Supreme Court did not qualify people with mental disorders as being candidates for euthanasia or assisted suicide. So it's clear that people, first of all, don't have a clear mind because of the negative thoughts. And secondly, what is irremediable or incurable, the majority of psychiatrists can't agree on that. They cannot agree on what is incurable, irremediable. They don't, because what one psychiatrist will say is incurable, another one will say no, it's curable. And there's multiple medications, multiple therapies that some of them haven't even been used. For example, at our gathering, we had a pet therapist who spoke about how the benefits of pet therapy, music therapy, art therapy, many other outside of psychiatric psychologists, social workers, and none of these things are even properly being given. In Canada, it's very hard to have a psychologist for a person with mental disorders. They need proper housing, food, rents have gone skyrocketing, I'm sure in your country too. And inflation has affected food for people even before they were barely able to eat. So it just doesn't make any sense. It's no sense, you know. It's pure madness to even try to justify that. It's unethical.
Absolutely. You mentioned that one of the key factors right at the beginning in terms of the erosion of Canadian law was the Canadian Medical Association going neutral on the whole issue. And we've certainly seen in other parts of the world attempts to push the National Medical Association neutral, and that has certainly sped up the process. Is there much opposition coming from within sections of the medical profession in Canada at the moment, and how effective has that been? I know that the CMDA, the Christian Medical and Dental Association of Canada, has been very vocal in opposing it, and also in seeking to protect conscience. But what about the rest of the medical profession in Canada? How are they reacting?
I think they're afraid. I think people are afraid to stand up. They're worried about their license. They're worried about I was recently, on a different note, I fought for our local community hospital to keep our emergency room open and to keep our hospital as a fully functioning hospital, which I've been doing for years. And the director of the hospital took an action against me to try to have my license revoked for that reason. After a year, they pulled back and they didn't go anywhere. But that was just to try to keep a hospital open. And they said I gave false information saying that closing emergency rooms would be harmful. And that's clear. All this literature shows that closing emergency rooms has a negative impact. So on subjects like euthanasia, assisted suicide, people are somewhat fearful to have their medical society, the disciplining boards come against them. But I encourage them. I say, stand up, not be afraid. You know, we have the right on our side, and we know we're right, and we need to continue to stand up and speak out as we're doing today.
Absolutely, and sadly we've run out of time today, but we're incredibly grateful to you for opening or shedding the light on what's happening in Canada, bringing out the warnings to us, the steps along the way to look for in other constituencies, but also most of all for your testimony, your personal example, and your courage in standing up against the tide. And right at the beginning, you said there's always hope and we should never give up. So thank you so much for joining us today on ICMDA webinars. And it just remains to me to say thanks again, Dr. Paul, for joining us, and for all of you for coming along and joining us on ICMDA webinars. We look forward to seeing you again soon. God bless you.